Hello, nature photographers. It's Lee Hoy, and I'm coming to you from another hotel room. This time, I am right in the thick of my first ever OM system only fall and Grand Teton and Yellowstone National Parks workshop. This workshop has been designed to take an OM system shooter and immerse them in every single computational feature related to nature photography. So we've been out and about shooting live composite, live time, talking about the difference in live bulb. We've looked at focus stacking and focus bracketing. We've talked about nailing your exposure, how to set your autofocus to succeed for every different nature genre of photography like landscape, night sky, macro, wildlife. We've actually programmed menus. We have taken a look at HDR and auto exposure bracketing. We have looked at starry sky autofocus. We have been really diving in. We've looked at post processing, DxO Pure Raw, Photo Mechanic, Lightroom, on and on and on. It's been we've covered a lot of material in just a few days. It's snowing very heavily here in West Yellowstone, where we're staying one more night before heading over to Gardner. And I think the clients will tell you they've all been learning quite a bit. And one of the things that we did is the topic of today's video. So this is another video in the series, how did I get the shot? So we are going to take this image right here, and we're going to talk about fieldcraft, technical skills, creative skills, patience, and luck, and how it all came together for us to capture this image. The cool thing is it wasn't just me that got this image, but every single one of my clients were able to capture star trails with Old Faithful at night. It was really amazing. We also shot the comet. So we're going to talk about all the different elements that went into capturing this image right after this. Howdy from West Texas. I'm Lee Hoy, professional nature photographer, and this is my YouTube channel, Lee Hoy Photography. I'm an OM system ambassador, photography workshop instructor for Wildside Nature Tours of Precision Camera and Video, and contributing author for the Journal of Wildlife Photography. Well, how did I capture this image? Let's talk about the first step. The first step is equipment, okay? And let's go into my formula of success that was a few videos back. Preparation plus skill times patience equals luck. Well, under preparation, there's some things that I did. One of them is a practice I call pre-visualization. And eventually I'll do a video on that. But pre-visualization is about taking an image in your mind and contemplating, considering, what would it look like? How would I capture it? And I use that regularly for capturing nature images. So I knew that I wanted to capture Old Faithful and star trails in the same image. Now, I knew we would be up here at a time when the moon would be bright, so that would come into play. I had taken a look at where Polaris would be found. So, preparation was using two particular apps, Photo Pills and Sky Safari Pro, those two apps, as well as Clear Outside, and I've talked about some of these apps in the past, to look ahead at how would we go about capturing this image. So preparation involved pre-visualization and using apps to kind of get a feel for where we would want to be. Now, another element, so under preparation is equipment, right? And there's two different aspects of equipment: preparation, knowing what gear you probably will need, and then technical skill, knowing how to use your gear to capture the proper exposure. Well, the gear I used to capture this specific image is an OM1 Mark II. I used the M.Zuiko 7 to 14 millimeter IS Pro lens. I used my favorite tripod, my Photo Pro E6L, and I used an OM system remote shutter. All of those items can be found below in the video description, and as usual, I greatly appreciate using my affiliate links to make those purchases. So that was the gear I had on me when I captured the shot. Now let's talk about the technical skill required. Well, number one, I knew I was going to use live composite to capture the star trails. So that means I need to understand how live composite works, and I need to understand, proper exposure, how to use my custom night mode. So I have custom modes programmed on every camera body, and one of them is for night sky photography. So I'm going to use that mode to set my base exposure. I will determine my shutter speed using the PhotoPill app, where we use the feature called Spot Stars. In there, so the proper shutter speed is based upon the focal length of the lens you'll be using, and not just the overall, but if you have a zoom lens, you need to know exactly what focal length you're at when you calculate that. Well, there's two rules found in that feature, the NFT rule and the 1/500 rule. The 1/500 rule is generally too slow for spot stars. The NFT is generally a little fast for capturing a proper exposure. I generally use somewhere in the middle. However, we're doing star trails, so we're not really worried about a little movement, because that's the whole point. We're going to capture movement. So then I know that my f-stop is going to be f2.8 or faster for night sky stuff. Now, this image ended up being, I believe, 3.5, because I also had a nearly full moon that is going to light up the foreground quite bright. My ISO ended up being 3200. I could have put it a little lower, but I just wanted to make sure that I was capturing enough detail in the foreground. And again, I probably could have gone to 1600, but I ended up at 32. I also need to have the technical skill to know that live histogram and live highlight alerts don't work for such long exposures. So those are useless in this particular situation. So I go into my night sky mode. I capture focus on a star. I set a base exposure. I then switch over to live composite mode, or B mode, bulb mode, on my exposure mode dial. I then make sure, using a dial, front or rear, depending on how you have your camera programmed, to change to live comp. I then set my ISO and my f-stop to match the base exposure. And you don't want to base your base exposure on how it looks on the back of the camera. You want to use your post-capture histogram and highlight alerts to make sure you did not blow out the stars. If all the stars in your star trail are white, you blew them out. You should be able to see red, blue star. You should be able to see the colors in the stars. Then we're going to go into our menu and set up our shutter speed in the live comp settings. That's where you set your shutter speed. You don't set it on the back of the camera for like a normal exposure. Live composite is where it takes the same image, the same exposure, over and over and over, only recording brighter pixels. So it's perfect for star trails, because with the OM system, we get one file, a raw file, where it is already composited together. So I posted this picture on social media today, and I already had someone ask me if I used AI or if I had to do stacking. No, doing this image with any other camera system really isn't possible, because you would not have this nice smooth drifting of Old Faithful. It'd be very, very difficult. You just don't see this image done with other camera systems. So that's another important aspect of the technical skill here. Then also under the technical skill, using the two apps to plan the image. Now, in the field, okay, we also have to have the creative element of our formula. So we have preparation plus skill, and under skill is technical and creative. Well, the creative element, a couple of things come into play. The composition. Now, we had a full moon, and that made it quite easy to see the entire image. But let's say we didn't have such a bright moon. Well, I would turn on night vision to help prep composition to be able to see the foreground. Now, since live highlight alerts and live histogram isn't important in live comp, you could leave night vision on, okay, as long as you know your base exposure is correct, because night vision does away with WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get exposure. But in live comp, that's not what we're doing anyways, okay? You can watch the image develop, but we set the base exposure outside of live comp. We want to make sure that we compose our image in a way that it will be visually compelling. Now, a couple of elements come into that are related to fieldcraft, okay? Number one, we're at Old Faithful, which is normally a very busy place. However, at this time of year, in fall, we went out there, and the eruption was somewhere, I think, around 10:30. No, the eruption in this image, I think, was closer to 8:30. There were still maybe 6 people out there. We did have to ask a couple people not to use flashlights. It was a near full moon. You don't need flashlights to walk around. We had to make sure that we were careful and followed all National Park Service rules. That's an important part of fieldcraft. which meant staying on the boardwalk. We also wanted to make sure we were not near others on the boardwalk so that if a lot of people were walking close, their footsteps on the boardwalk would not cause any vibration in our tripods. We wanted to make sure that we were, again, far enough away where people's iPhone shots and other things might not come into play in our image. Another element, when you look at this image and take another look at it, the wind direction was very important. Knowing where Polaris was very important. I love star trails with the North Star or Polaris because you get these nice tight circles that expand out from the North Star. Well, if you look at my composition and the visual balance of this image, Old Faithful, as it erupts, the wind takes it towards the tight circles from Polaris. And it almost looks like it's being pulled into those circles, right? The visual balance in this image works. If the wind were blowing the other direction and Old Faithful drifted to the right, it would not feel visually balanced because you would have the vortex, which is a very heavy dominant feature in the image. So the tight circles form where your eye starts, and then your eye follows Old Faithful down. If Old Faithful drifted the other way, the visual balance would be off. It would be going into the negative, it'd be going into the positive space. It would just, it would not be a good image. So fortunately, with the wind direction going the way it was, and with Polaris where it was, we could shoot away from the many buildings. So there's a visitor center, there's employee housing, there's an administration building behind us. Thankfully, the wind direction and where the moon was located and where Polaris was located, everything lined up. And I had to know that beforehand. Otherwise, wouldn't have even attempted the shot. Now, the wind direction, that can change rapidly, but it worked perfectly. So what we did is we positioned ourselves on the boardwalk where I thought as the wind blew, because there's always steam coming out. So as the steam came out, I could see the direction it was going. And I thought, okay, we want to find where Polaris is and set up roughly for this. Well, that's the creative side of it and fieldcraft. Now, fieldcraft means, and I warn my clients, do not step around a lot around your tripod. It's always tempting to keep checking on it. I don't like doing that. I'm just, because I already know I've acquired focus. I know my base exposure is correct. And I can see from a long ways away on whether or not the exposure is where I wanted it. To be honest, I would have liked to have had longer star trails. Unfortunately, there was a Chinese tourist who could not find his wife and kids, and he came out there with a flashlight that was bright enough to light up everything. And rather than risk losing the image, we just stopped our shutters. But I still love this image and the way it came out. So you've got to constantly be aware of your surroundings. Obviously, there's wildlife in the area. There's other people. And they have as much right to be out at Old Faithful as we do. What the guy didn't know is if he'd turned his flashlight off, your visual, your night sky with the bright moon, you could see further than if you're using a flashlight. And good fieldcraft meant being aware of each other's tripods, not bumping them, not turning on your phone or a flashlight or a headlamp that could all ruin a shot. So good fieldcraft also involves safety. There were benches and you're on a deck, really paying attention to where you're at, what you're doing. It was chilly out. I think it was in the low 40s or upper 30s. So having the right gear to stay warm is important. So we've talked about preparation. We've talked about skill, the creative skill, visualizing the image and trying to set up a composition. And I went with the 7-14 because I knew Polaris was a little higher in the sky and I wanted a broad field of view in order to capture. And we got lucky. The subsequent eruption of Old Faithful was kind of a little pissant eruption. It did not make for nearly as powerful an image. But we had a really nice large eruption. The wind drift and right towards Polaris worked well in this image. Now, then there's patience. The patience requires, knowing that if you start, and you could call this skill too, starting the star trail before the eruption meant some stars were already in the image, and then when the drifting of steam and water from the eruption, you could still see some star trails behind the geyser. That was an important part of patience. Another part of patience is not constantly checking your camera, not touching crap, not touching your remote shutter, right? So that you don't accidentally hit the shutter button and stop the image. These are all important elements in patience. So many people get nervous, they keep wanting to look at it, and some of the clients looked at it a lot more than I would look at mine. But I really recommend just starting it and leave it alone. You don't need to keep messing with it. Well, also under patience is knowing that it's going to be chilly, it's going to be a long night, and learning how to balance that when you're out in the field. And then there's luck, right? And you can say that the wind direction was luck. Also knowing that our clients, that I put them in that they were willing to go to a place where it's dark, where there's bears and other wildlife and stuff, and being able to be out in the field, they created that luck by being there. We created that luck by knowing how to expose for it and learning how to expose for it. We created that luck by investing in good quality tripods and remote shutters and being willing to deal with all the challenges of photographing at night. I mean, we had the comet the same night on the other side. There were a lot of distractions, but luck came into play because of wind direction. Honestly, having a brighter moon light up the foreground made it easier for my clients who had never attempted this. And, I would have preferred a slightly less bright moon, but another aspect of luck is that we didn't have people who ruined the images with flashlights. There was a car that drove through, but where it lit up, it actually kind of contributed to the image. So all of those elements went into this particular image. Now, let me talk just briefly about post-processing. The first thing I did was run it through DxO Pure Raw 4 for noise reduction and sharpening. Then I cropped a little bit because I like a 3:2 ratio, not 4/3. So I had more foreground than I really wanted in my final image, which is fine because on a horizontal image, when I go to a 3:2 format, I'm going to lose top, bottom, or both, and I chose to lose it all on the bottom. In post-processing, I reduced the brightness on the foreground from the moon. I added some texture to give it a little crunch so you could feel that crust, the grass, and whatnot there in the foreground. On the sky, I added some contrast. I wanted to give a little bolder feel. Oh, when we shot, we did not leave our white balance on auto white balance, excuse me, because the moon makes it so blue. So we went in and we moved custom white balance to the right to around 7K to start to help our whites be more white. So rarely does white balance work when you got a bright moon, auto white balance. So we set a custom white balance. And in post-processing, we just made little minor tweaks to white balance. I used some masking, not just on the sky and on the foreground, but I used some masking as well to fix one little tiny spot where some headlights made the foreground a little bright. And so just minor things like that. On the sky, I added just a tiny bit of clarity to bring out some of the colors in the stars. Did not have to do a whole lot of adjustments to this image because when you start with a great image, in capturing it, exposing to the right, your editing will be significantly reduced. So how we got the shot, those are all the different elements that went into capturing this particular image. It is an advanced capture, but if I'm honest, once you really master your gear, it's relatively easy to do. It's not easy to control the wind direction or when Old Faithful erupts or the number of people that are around that might ruin the shot. How many cars there may or may not have been. What's the weather like? The wind wasn't strong enough to cause camera shake or anything like that. Everybody was well behaved with flashlights, headlamps, iPhones. All of those different elements have to come together really well. If you're out here in the summer and you try this, it gets darker later, so you're going to have to be out later. My recommendation is if you want to do this, go out in the absolute middle of the night, sit through at least 2 eruptions and just be ready for an all-nighter and sleep in one morning, be well rested. Obviously, have bear spray if you're by yourself, be smart, stay alert to your surroundings. And for God's sake, don't keep checking the camera. Don't touch it. Start your remote, leave it alone, and let it develop. Watch it develop. This exposure was around 30 minutes total. I think that I would have loved for it to be an hour or longer. I love really long star trails, but I love this image. I'm very happy with it. My clients are very happy with their captures. So you know what? If you want to learn some of these advanced techniques, you can watch YouTube videos. You can read the manual like I do. But if you really want to learn, jump on an OM System only workshop with me, an OM System ambassador. I am working on an OM system only macro workshop in Costa Rica next year, probably in September. I'll have this exact workshop. I already have one, maybe two people signed up, and maximum, I believe, is 5 on this workshop. Lots of personal attention, and you'll learn. We'll deal with every computational photography feature as well as many others. And then I'll have the Mastering Birds in Flight OM system only in Florida. I believe I already have 2 of 3 spaces filled for that coming up next March. And I'm going to work on an OM system only landscape workshop, probably in the Big Bend National Park region or some other area like that. So that's how I got the shot. I hope you love the shot. It's been an incredible about 10 days so far. I think we have about 4 left on this particular workshop. It's immersive, it's experimental, it is intense, and it is worth your money. You will learn a lot. Guys, remember, get out there, go capture some visually compelling images, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye.